Welcome, folks. This is the Michael Muto Show here on West Limerick 102 FM. And I cannot believe on the line right now we have Jesse Thorn, who, yes, that Jesse Thorn from Bullseye on NPR and head of the Maximum Fun Network and everything. and put this on and all kinds of stuff. Jesse, welcome.
Thank you. You may be overestimating the value of my name in Limerick.
No, I was excitedly telling everyone, I was like, oh, Jesse Thorn is going to be on, can you believe it? And co-host of the Judge John Hodgeman Show, and we'll get into all of it.
Yeah.
But, and I won't take you too long, because I know you're very busy, so, But, so you started doing your show, which then became Bullseye, which is a fantastic show, can I just say. Your interview skills are just, everyone always gushes about that anyway. But, you started your show, Sound of Young America. Yes, I wrote that down because I kept wanting to say the voice, and I was like, don't say voice, dude, but say sound. Sound of Young America in 1999. And then this is the bit that caught me off guard. You started the podcast of your show in 2004, which is so early.
I didn't
even have iTunes.
Podcasts that existed for 6 months or something.
Yeah. It's crazy. And that, of course, spun off into Jordan Jesse Go and Bullseye and everything, and because it was a podcast, you started the Maximum Fun Network. But I want to go back is the start though, is what brought you into doing the radio show in the first place in your college?
Well, I went to the University of California at Santa Cruz, which is this, it's a public university, and Santa Cruz is a coastal town that's south of San Francisco, about an hour and a half. And the campus is this big kind of mountain forest. And it's a beautiful place. It's always wet. It's a little bit like Return of the Jedi. If you think of where the Ewoks live in Return of the Jedi, that's basically the UC Santa Cruz campus. And I was there, and I knew that I didn't want to act. I had gone to an arts high school and had acted, 3 or 4 hours a day for my entire high school career. I knew I was not that talented. And but I knew that I loved performing. So this was the days before you could buy a digital video camera that was worth its salt for a small enough amount of money that a broke teen could afford it. And there was no television station on campus. If you were a film major, you got a camera your senior year for one semester. Yeah. And so really, I turned on the college radio station one day, and we were lucky to have a pretty powerful college radio station. And I listened to it, and I thought, well, gosh, I bet I could do that. And I went down to the station, and they gave me a little tour, and the thing that I remember most vividly is I had imagined this big complicated production going on. Yeah. When in reality, I was like, oh, so up is louder and down is quieter? Yeah. And so I pretty much recruited the two funniest people I knew in college, and we went there with the plan to make a very ambitious show, which quickly collapsed. And eventually we pretty much landed on doing about half an hour of bits and a half hour live interview on the show. And, by the time we were getting especially the comedy people that we most admired, the Upright Citizens Brigade and stuff like that, it was like, oh, we're actually doing something. And, I was lucky that my buddies from college they really wanted to do something, really wanted to work hard and make something that was worth making. Jordan Jesse Go, my co-host Jordan, he was, I was 19, he was 18. I was his resident advisor. I was the boss of his residential hall. And, our friend Gene, who co-hosted with us, he's a producer on Big Brother now. And, we were ambitious for slackers.
I was going to say, to have that kind of, to do an arts program, basically, it's an interview show really, but to be doing that kind of a thing at 19, I don't know if I would have done it at 19. I would have been just like goof offs, and the humor wouldn't have been good. It would have just been like fart jokes and stuff. It wouldn't have been, anything
I mean,
good.
I'm not sure that the humor was good. I remember we had a running bit that was us talking to a record of whale sounds.
I wish I could say I've never done something similar.
We did that once, then thought we should do it more times.
See, now that's too far for me now.
But and I think we ended up doing an interview show because we realized that writing an hour of material the night before we had to get up at 6:00 in the morning and wander across the campus because the buses weren't running yet to do a morning radio show was too ambitious by half. So we realized, like, if we just called Dick Dale, the king of the surf guitar, at his trailer in the desert, we could fill half a show just with that. But, we also, I can't speak to why Jordan and Gene were working so hard on the show. For me, it was about the fact that I had put myself in a position where, I got like, I've got like drama of the gifted child perfectionism issues where I have a hard time starting anything because I'm worried that it's not going to be exactly right. Mm-hmm. When you have to go on the radio every week, like the choices are you do it or you're breaking the law by not being present for emergency alerts. So it was a way to force ourselves to do something every week for almost the entirety of our college careers and then beyond. And we I know I was motivated primarily by the fear of embarrassing myself. So you work hard so you don't look like a dope. And I'm sure we did look like a dope, don't get me wrong, but less than we would have had we been lazing around. I remember listening to people's college radio shows, and our station had some people who were unpaid volunteers, but had been doing their shows for many years and were really important parts of the community, And then sometimes it was just like a 20-year-old playing throbbing Gristle songs because they thought it was funny, And we thought, maybe we could do something that would be distinctive, but also something that people might want to actually listen to.
Yeah. So you were mature even as 19. That's pretty because I would have done that, I think, at 19. I would have played like Throbbing Gristle. I would have said, this will annoy people, and that would have been just it. It would have been just like a weird art thing to me. It wouldn't have been like a proper program, I wouldn't have the force to go.
But you're 20 now, it's different.
But no, well then, you put it out as a podcast, and in 2004, when there was no podcasts, and that got then picked up by it wasn't
Michael,
NPR.
There were podcasts. There were over six podcasts at the time.
I'd never heard of it, but I was thinking back to 2004, and I was asking some people, and I was like, did you know about podcasts 2004? They were like, no. No, me neither.
It was a time when you had to manually put podcasts onto your iPod. It was before iTunes had podcasting support.
Yeah. Really? It was actually before. Oh, well, I didn't realize that.
I used to drag podcasts onto my Creative Rio MP3 player. But I wasn't even a tech guy. Yeah. I just had a family friend who said, how you do that radio show? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, there's this thing called podcast. You should try that. And I was like, well, maybe I could get 50 people to listen. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, people did listen because then you got picked up by, it wasn't NPR at that point. It was another station, wasn't it, before that?
Yeah, a network called Public Radio International.
That was it.
At the time, we're best known for distributing the public radio show This American Life. Mm-hmm. They don't exist anymore, but yeah, I basically got an email because I was hanging around in the podcast charts because there just weren't a lot of podcasts at the time. Mm-hmm. And I got an email from this guy named Mike Arnold, who was the programming boss of Public Radio International. He said, if we were interested, would you be interested? And I was like, yes, of course. And then I didn't hear from him for 8 months. And I was pretty sure that was over. And I was pretty sure the answer to the question of whether they were interested was no.
Yeah.
And and then they offered me a deal. And the terrifying part was that they sent me like a projected revenue sheet. And at the end of 5 years, I think the gross revenue was something like $30,000. And I was like, uh-oh. But that was $30,000 more than I was making at the time. Mailing a CD to, I was on a couple of other stations besides Santa Cruz, but I would literally mail them a CD or email them an MP3 file. This was like the very beginning of a radio station being able to burn its own CD of an MP3 I sent them. So... I was like, well, $30,000 is $30,000. I'll work towards that over the course of 5 years. But that was also, when I realized that you couldn't make a living making your own public radio show, I just thought, I moved to Los Angeles with my now wife, and I just thought, well, I guess I'll start a podcast network.
I mean,
I gotta eat.
What? But where did you get the idea to start a podcast network? I mean, was that a thing around? Was that
Not really. I mean, there was a computer guy named Leo Laporte. He had a few shows, and they were selling ads to companies that sell you motherboards for your gaming PC or whatever. And there was a guy who had been on MTV in the late '80s, named Adam Curry, and I think he had some. He had a few $1 million in sort of investor money, and was
it was like the RSS feeds or something.
Yeah, it was like the very very dawn of the whole thing. And the only successful company that came out of that initial podcast boom was Twitter, which was a spinoff of a podcasting company called Odeo.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's really weird.
But yeah, I mean, it was like, it was basically, my father had been a fundraising consultant for most of his career, and an organizer primarily, but he made his living, such as it was, as a fundraising consultant. So I knew something about nonprofit fundraising. I'd worked at nonprofits. That was sort of the job I had to support myself. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to be able to sell any ads, so I got to ask people to give me money. Yeah. And PayPal had subscription buttons that were plug and play. You just copied the HTML code and it put it on your website. And I just thought, I'll just ask people to give me $3 a month and see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I figured I needed more than one show to kind of give people a deeper connection. So I started a show with Jordan, my old radio co-host, a comedy show, and started producing a sketch comedy show called Casper Hauser, and sort of went from there. And I didn't make any money for a long time. I mean, it was like, I didn't need much money at the time. And my wife had law school loans. That helped. But but yeah, basically I just made $12,000 for 5 years. It was just sort of my life. Because if I can get $1,000 a month, I can pay my half of the rent and buy food and catastrophic health insurance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but then the network has kind of ballooned out, and you've got like live shows and lots of stuff now as well. And the McElroys, of course, are famously from the Maximum Fun everything. And but to go back to Bullseye and stuff like that, your interviewing style I got to talk about, because that is something right, so it's a cliche now, right? Well, people maybe they don't know. When Jesse's interviewing someone, at one point in the interview, at least once, they'll go, I never thought about it like that. But yeah, that's a good point, yeah. Because you'll bring a point of view to their work they've never thought of before, and you can tell that you've really gotten into their work, you've really dug deep, you've had your own point of view about it. It's not exactly a review you're giving them. You just go, do you think that this part of your life has inspired this?
Well, I used to listen a lot to a show called The Treatment, hosted by a culture critic named Elvis Mitchell. And Elvis used to be film critic for the New York Times. He was a theater critic, and he just knows everything about everything. I mean, the breadth of knowledge that Elvis has is so extraordinary. And he talks to people like a critic, which is to say that he has some synthesis of the themes of their work and has perspective on their work. And I like to hear about biography as much as the next person, but I think I always imagined that my show was about the work that people made.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why I was inviting people on the show, and that's what I wanted to talk to them about. You know, I don't, like, to the extent that, you know, Mike Leigh's life informs his very particular way of making films,
Yeah.
I'm interested in talking about Mike Leigh's life, certainly. And, you know, anytime you're talking to a human being, you want to know about their life. But
Yep.
the fundamental reason that Mike Leigh is there is because he's an extraordinary filmmaker, and his filmmaking takes a very distinctive and unusual form. So I do want to ask him about that. And I think that, you know, the reality is that I'm the boss of my radio show, and I can't book anyone that I want to invite, but I can invite anyone that I want, and I don't invite people that I don't want. And so, you know, I think a lot of people who are artists who do press, you know, they're just talking to a general assignment arts reporter from the San Jose Mercury News, and that person has to file another story tomorrow, and they may or may not have any particular connection to that person's work. And they're pros, like they know what they're doing, but they're not, you know, they're just trying to get some quotes to fill out their article, you know, because that's their job. And I'm doing something very different, and I think it's a relief sometimes to people that I'm doing this other thing. And it's not, I don't, like, I truly don't mean to speak ill of general interest arts reporters for the San Jose Mercury News. But
just specifically them.
Just that one guy. Ooh, Frank Thompson. But I think that as an experience for the person that I'm talking to them like a human being is very different. And, you know, I think that one of the things that I've learned over having done this now 20 years, is that even movie stars and stuff are just like a person, you know, like sometimes they're really good looking, but like,
the best thing that comes across on your show is that you are talking to them as just a person. You're not really you're elevating their art, and you're saying how amazing it is, and you can tell you're a fan of them, but you're talking to them on, you know, on a basic human level, you know, and that's what genuinely does come across, and it was really like brings you back every week to listen to more and more.
I'm glad to hear that, because I mean, it's like, I think that doing a live show that was right away with our heroes, which is how the show started. You're just dumped into the pool, you know, and the only way to deal with it is to be present and talk to the person like a human being. And I did this show years ago called The Turnaround that was about interviewing, and I interviewed famous interviewers about interviewing, like
Dick Cavett and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I the one that made the most impact on me was Larry King, who's a very, very, very famous radio and television host in the United States. Passed away recently.
Oh, we know him over here as well.
There you go.
He's brilliant. So, he was brilliant.
Yeah, old Larry King. You know, he's got this reputation for being both a genius and a doofus, right? Like that was his reputation. The people said he was unprepared and blah 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 blah. And he made his bones doing a 4-hour overnight radio show. If you're filling 4 hours in the middle of the night, you're doing interviews, there's only so much preparation you can do. Mostly you just have to live there in the moment and be frankly curious and talk to people like human beings. And, you know, he did the show out of a diner for a long time. And he'd just, if he needed to fill time, he'd just go talk to the people who were there at the diner, you know? He'd get whatever, Frankie Valli or whatever, to come to the diner to talk to him. And that kind of feeling of being actually present with someone is the feeling that is most interesting to me about doing an interview show. And it's hard for me because I'm an over-preparer and an over-planner and you know, I want to control it and, you know. But the thing that I'm pursuing is to feel like I'm a person talking to a person.
Yeah.
And that I actually care and I'm curious about what their deal is. You know?
It always comes across that you're a fan. Like, it doesn't seem like you prepared just for that. It seems like you're like, no, I've been watching your stuff for a while, and as you say, like, it is someone that you're a fan of, and that's who you've had on.
I mean, that's the luxury of having your own show, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's kind of what I do with this show as well too.
Yeah, like once in a while now I used to make the show completely by myself, but I have two producers now.
Yeah.
And those two producers, only one of whom is full-time, we'll have a meeting and talk about who we should have on the show. And once in a while, we'll say, oh, so-and-so has a movie coming out. And I'll be like, yeah, I mean, I know by reputation that they're good, but I don't really care about them. So it's not a compelling thing for me. And I have the luxury of saying that because it's my show.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
Which is how we end up with having had every member of the entire cast of Archer on the show. But yeah, like, I am a fan of the people that are on my show, but I try and, I mean, like I said, the thing that I've learned is that it doesn't matter if it's, Eric Idle or whatever, somebody that is like unto a god to me. It's actually just a guy, it's just like this funny old guy sitting across this, sitting 5 feet away from me, in a funny little Paul Smith shirt, and you're just like, well, isn't that interesting? That guy from the movies I watched 75 times as a child is just a guy, just like my uncle or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing I want to ask you actually is that you were saying there how you were doing it yourself. You used to do it out of your apartment, your nationally syndicated radio show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what happened is I moved home to San Francisco after I graduated from college, and for a while I was borrowing my mom's car to drive to Santa Cruz, which is, an hour and a half drive. And I didn't have a car that was good enough to drive over this mountain. I was driving a Chevy El Camino, a half car, half truck. And it was 15...
I thought you said, how it is. And I'm like, I don't know, but it's okay anyway.
There's a terrifying mountain freeway called the 85 in between San Jose and Santa Cruz. You'd have to drive over it, and I was like, I can't drive over it in this 1982 Chevy El Camino, so I would borrow my mom's car, drive over this mountain, and at some point it was just unworkable and a little pathetic, and so I sold my car. By then I was driving a 65 Dart. I sold this 65 Dodge Dart to this nice man and his son. They were gonna have it be a project car, and I stopped driving to Santa Cruz, and I bought a telephone hybrid, the machine that you use to record interviews over the phone.
Okay.
And they're expensive at the time. They cost like $800 or something. And I bought one of these things, and I just started doing it in my apartment because I couldn't afford an office or a studio or anything like that.
Yeah.
And honestly, the big inflection point was that I moved from my college radio station to the local NPR station. Yes. And just somebody on the board of that station had heard me on the college station and thought, maybe we should run this show. They weren't paying me anything. And when I made that move, the big difference was that the NPR station had a board operator. So the board operator could be in charge of the emergency alerts. So you're required by law to have somebody who's in charge, who presses the button that puts the emergency alert on the radio if there's a tornado or something. And I didn't have to drive to Santa Cruz to be that person. I could just send them the show. So that was that was the difference. I was initially mailing them a CD of the show that I had burned on my computer because they had somebody there to press play on it. And at the college station, there was no one to press play, so I had to drive there. I truly couldn't afford the gas to drive back and forth. It was costing me like $40 a week or $50 a week. And I was like, I don't have $40 a week.
No.
It was like a money saving scheme. But I did the show. Yeah, I mean, I did the show from my apartment, first in San Francisco, then in Los Angeles, until until maybe 8 or 10 years ago. I mean, I did it out of my apartment for a decade. And it's funny, by the time it was towards the end of that, I was a little trepidatious about getting an office. I only did because I had a kid and I was waking up the baby. But I was trepidatious because there really was something special about having, Jenna Fisher from The Office or whatever show up, and she's like, "Oh, I'm at your house," and there's a kind of assumed intimacy of having someone in your home that I had to recreate.
Do you think that affected your interview style as well? Like how it is like you can't really get too up yourself. I mean, if you're in a big fancy studio, you're like, oh, well, here we are. But when you're in a home, you're like, well, hi, how are you?
Yeah, I think there were two things.
Their guard is down,
There were two kind of structural things that affected it.
Mm-hmm.
One was that, here's someone sitting down in my apartment in Koreatown, and I wasn't interviewing mostly people that came with entourages, you know what I mean? Just people that drove over and I told them where to park, And so there was that. And I think the other thing was that for a long time the show was live. And then after that, just because of my time, because I had another job, I couldn't edit very much. So I just didn't have the time to do a big edit. So I was pretty much interviewing to the clock, like if I had a half-hour slot in the show, I tried to do a half-hour interview because I just didn't have the time in my life to do a big edit because I had a job that paid. I mean, it didn't pay much, but that's what I was eating. So I learned to, for good and ill, I learned to manage the interview actively. For that reason, I was sort of my own director, my own producer. Whereas maybe if I had done it, if it had always been highly polished, I might have gone on more fishing expeditions and interviews. I might have been more of a Barbara Walters or something, someone who produces a television feature who's really just looking for a few big emotional moments, whereas my interviews were always built to have a structure that was built into them, rather than be a search for moments that then would have a structure built around them.
Yeah. Well, then I suppose we should talk. Well, actually, there's another thing. Actually, speaking of doing a podcast from your home, is this a rumor or is this true? Did you help Marc Maron set up his garage?
Yeah, Marc had been on my show a few times.
Yeah.
I really loved his comedy, and but only by phone. I don't think I had ever met him personally in real life. Maybe I had said hello to him after a stand-up show or something.
Yeah.
But he knew I was a podcaster, and he and his producer Brendan had started WTF, his podcast.
It was after Air America shut down, wasn't it? That he started that.
So Air America hadn't shut down yet, so that's the thing.
Oh, right.
And Marc got fired from Air America like 7 different times.
Right.
And the last time he got fired, he had been doing like a web show there or something.
Yeah.
And he and Brendan had been working together on that web show, and their key card to Air America just never got deactivated.
That was right, yeah.
So Marc would just knew when everyone went home, and he and Brendan would just go in after that and use the studio to record his podcast. I think like the first, 30 or 40 episodes of WTF, they just recorded, they were experimenting with the format and stuff, and they just recorded them in the Air America office after they had been laid off. But then Marc moved to LA. He had gotten divorced and he bought a house in LA and moved out to LA. And he emailed me and said, "Hey man, you're a podcaster. Do you know anything about podcasting?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "What stuff should I get?" And I was like, "Well, just get this, get an SM7 and we'll go from there." And and he said, "Hey man, you want to come over and help me set this stuff up?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And it's funny because my place in WTF history is so grand. When in fact, what really happened is I just went over for a couple hours one afternoon.
Yeah.
But I didn't expect Marc to become one of the most successful culture interviewers in the world. I probably would have told him to buy the wrong microphone if I knew this was a threat. But he's been so kind about like crediting me for that. It's just so nice of him. I mean, I wonder if that's going to be my legacy in the world, is that I told Marc what mic to buy.
Oh, but, I mean, that's like a side thing as well, though.
But it really did. It really did happen, and like, Marc really is. I mean, he's such a brilliant comic that it seems unfair that he would be so good at something else too. But for a guy who spent the first 25 years of his career trying to figure out where he fit into entertainment, he was a successful stand-up. He'll tell you that he wasn't, but he was a very successful stand-up. But he wasn't a famous person, and to have this thing kind of fall into his lap that he has such a gift for is pretty amazing. And I mean, to me, it's just amazing that Marc is so good at those two different things. I'm barely good at one thing.
Well, I suppose. No, I'm gonna have to. No, that's not true, because I mean, you got the fashion thing, you got running a whole network. I could go on anyway. But I wanted to say though, I think that what it is to bring it back to where you do your interviews, or how you started off doing interviews, was that you showed that you don't need a big studio, that you can do it from your home and it can sound good, and if you put the work in, it can sound great, as yourself and himself has shown off.
I mean, like, the reason I'm working radio is basically the same reason that I ever did, I mean, it's like, higher is louder and lower is quieter is still basically, I mean, as I say that, the metal shop across the street from my house right now, they're dragging a stainless steel restaurant kitchen across the floor, so you can probably hear that. But
a little bit. It's all right. That's nice.
Yeah, it's atmospheric. The sounds of East Los Angeles. But
there you go.
Like, it's still something that really can be made in professional quality, completely independently, in a way that even now, with the profound democratization of video that has happened, blah blah blah, there's a movie camera in your pocket, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Audio remains dramatically more accessible to people with no capital.
It's more intimate as well too with the listener.
Yeah,
something about audio
has its. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to do hour-long interviews I mean, I would. If someone wanted to give me a television show, I would take it. But let's be clear. But it's hard to make an hour-long television interview show, whereas the intimacy of audio and the fact that you can do the dishes while you're listening
exactly
is a very special quality. It's just that, like, I don't know, maybe if I was 10 years younger, I'd be trying to direct movies or something, but
maybe
as a broke kid, I was like, oh, even when I started doing the whole show from my house instead of from a community radio station, it was like, I mean, I had to buy $1,000 worth of equipment, but I didn't have to buy $10,000 worth of equipment.
Exactly. Yeah. But so MaximumFun.org, when did that start exactly? When was the starting date in that?
I mean, I had registered a domain called splangy.com, which was just a nonsense word that was in an Upright Citizens Brigade sketch. And I talked to Matt Besser of the Upright Citizens Brigade once, years ago, and he said he tried to name his production company Splangy because it was a word he had said in an Upright Citizens Brigade sketch, and he was very vexed that someone had already registered that domain. But I figured it needed a little bit of a better name. I don't know if Maximum Fun is a good name. It's a little embarrassing, but I mean, basically it was the original idea was, I'm going to run this very roughly like a public radio station, which, here in the States are primarily supported by membership. And I thought, I should do more than just this one show if I'm going to ask people for money. And then by the time I had kind of built some infrastructure, figured out how to ask for money and, that kind of thing, how to host shows, et cetera, I thought, well, I built this thing, and there was a show called Stop Podcasting Yourself.
Yeah.
That
fantastic show.
People had been talking about in the forum for our shows, the message board. And I thought, I'll listen to this show. And I listened to it. I thought it was really good. And I just sent them an email and was like, hey, I liked your show. Do you want to team up? And they said, yes, that show's still going. And it's an amazing show.
Very, very good.
Still one
Brilliant.
of my favorite Max Fun shows. And, it just kind of went from there. It was like, well, I built this thing, and I have some systems, and there's a lot of people out there that want to be creators just like I did, but they don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. And maybe it would have been better if I had just invented Patreon at the time, because I'm sure that the guy from whatever, Bare Naked Ladies or whatever, who invented Patreon, that guy's richer than Croesus, I'm sure. But
is that who invented Patreon?
I don't think it's from the Bare Naked, but it was a band guy. It was like a guy from a band, but I don't remember what band it was. Maybe it was
would have been well if it was.
Yeah, the guy who wrote the guy who died, who wrote the songs for That Thing You Do. It was somebody like that, is in my imagination.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna find out that it was invented by Ronald Isley, and I'm just completely off base. But I'm in my memory, it's like a power pop guy that invented it.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I had thought about it in terms of economies of scale and not just in terms of independent media, I would be rich. But I do think that I'm very proud that, we built this business that is not exploitative of creative people, that supports people's ability to create independently and to make things that are built to be good, even if they're not built to be the most popular thing. I see the marketplace, I see what gets supported by commercial media, and the truth is that it's basically there's a few categories that you can easily sell ads. That's pharmaceuticals, business, tech, and then there's things with famous people, and then there's things that are designed to get everybody to listen through salaciousness or whatever, and it's just big swings, and you give it a try, and if it doesn't work, it's done. And my idea was always a sustainable home for things that were good, even if they were modest and good. And and we have had some home runs, to use a universally relatable analogy. But
a home, what?
But I think I'm as proud to provide structure and support for the shows on our network that have 5,000 listeners as I am to provide a structure and support for the shows on our network that have 500,000.
Yeah.
You know, I
You
mean, I'm
get a
glad
sense
we
of
have the
community as well.
500,000 ones because that means I own a house. But I'm proud of both.
Yeah. But I was saying there, you get a sense of community in Max and Fun, and everyone seems genuinely proud to be part of the network as well. You really do get a sense of, I'm really happy to be part of this. They always shout out other shows. You get a sense of, you definitely, and I found so many podcasts because I would have discovered your network through the Judge John Hodgeman podcast, which, yes, it is Jack John Hodgeman as well, folks. And I would have discovered it through that, and then I would have discovered yourself as you're the bailiff on that show. And that is a great show, by the way. It's one of my favorites. That got me through the pandemic, I gotta say. That was a brilliant show. That and Bullseye really did help me out.
Kind of got me through the big pandemic too. I had a very tough time, and John came on my show on The Sound of Young America when I was doing it in my apartment right after I sold my car and bought that telephone hybrid. And he coincidentally came on my show about 5 days before he got famous. And his generosity towards me and his kindness towards me just never ceased in the many years since. And I just, we came to be very close friends, but I've never lost my immense admiration for him. And it's funny, like that show used to be a side thing that he did when he wasn't busy being famous, basically.
Yeah.
And it's continued to grow over the many years we've done it very steadily. Like a lot of stuff we do at Max Fun. It grows steadily, not exponentially. And at this point, I just talked to him the other day. We had kind of a business meeting. And we were both marveling. We're like, wow, this show that used to just be the thing we did to fill time, was like he was trying to sell some extra books, and I just thought it would be fun. Like this, for both of us, like this is the main thing that pays our mortgage. We're like, wow, we actually made this into a actually successful thing. And Hodgeman, I think, always figured if he became actually successful, it would be as a television writer performer, and he certainly has continued to be successful as a television writer performer, but I don't think he ever expected that the center of his diagram of work and success and earnings would be the podcast. But that's how it goes sometimes.
One of my favorite things about that show is whenever someone that comes on with a problem and they have a dog and they send you a picture of that dog and you just lose it, and it's the funniest thing ever. I wish I had a dog right now to take a picture of to send you, but it's just so wholesome.
It's a fake judge show. It's like it's a real judge show, but he's a fake.
I should have said that. Sorry,
It's like we have these syndicated television judge shows in the United States, Judge Judy and whatnot, the People's Court. As well. And it's like that, but it's a comedy show. So it's the disputes are very much real, but they're not. Somebody stole my car. They're like they're domestic. They're friend things and domestic things and
the funniest
things
one,
about feelings.
One of the ones that stuck in my head, they're all really funny, but the one that stuck in my head was where a guy brought his dad in because he wanted him to stop making dad jokes when they were at a beautiful venue or something like that. They were at some mountain is hiking, and his dad would make a joke, and he was like, please.
The dad joke one that I remember the most is a dad who, no matter what restaurant they're at, would try and order the Kung Pao chicken. And I
remember that actually.
I think Hodgeman correctly identified that, and he would also do it in other customers. Like he would do it at toll booths on roads. He'd be like, they'd be like $4, please. And he'd be like, can I have the Kung Pao chicken? And I think Hodgeman correctly identified, one of the things about the show is that even though it's a comedy show, I think John is a very wise guy, and he really tries to find the kind of emotional center of these disputes. And for that one, at the emotional center ultimately was the fact that while this was, I think we both admitted, a pretty funny dad joke, it also was something that was both racially charged and was an abuse of the power differential between a customer and a customer service worker.
Yeah.
And that worker would not have the power in that situation to voice their discomfort or object to being made the subject of a joke. And, my favorite one of all time is without question this one that was called Der Fleeter House, which was AKA the Bat Brothers. And it was these two brothers who bought a house together in rural Kansas to save money. They bought this house for like $60,000. And, which as an Angelino is just insane to me that you could just buy an entire house for $60,000. But they bought this house together, and the only problem with this house was that there was a hole in the bathroom, and bats were getting in. And the dispute was between these two guys. It was very real. It was one of them wanted to spend, I think it was $3,000 to fix the hole.
Oh.
The other one said, we bought this house to save money. We can't spend $3,000 on some hole.
Yeah.
What we should do is we agree to keep the door to the bathroom closed at all times. So it's like a bat airlock. And if any bats get in, we always have a dictionary in the bathroom to hit the bats with. And it was so real. And I think, if I remember correctly, John's ultimate ruling involved kind of establishing a hole fixing fund that would be funded by instances of a bat getting into the house. And, he ultimately saw that, like, the relationship between these two brothers and the fact that they were trying to manage their finances together was all at the center of this, not bats. And that they had to find some way to have a shared relationship in this home. And that this bat jar where they had to put bat money anytime a bat got into the house was the way that they would find a common ground between the two of them.
I think it is. I think the fact that...
Michael, there was a bat hole in their house.
In the bat's room, which is the perfect place for us.
Oh my gosh, they're taking a shower and a bat comes in there? My gracious.
Just peeping on you.
$60,000 house in Kansas.
I think the fact that it spun off, though, from Bullseye makes sense, though. Because there is an emotional honesty to John's analysis of it sometimes. You do get to, like, sometimes it is like a funny kind of answer, but sometimes, as you say, like, it is like a real thing. And you're really talking to people. You're not like going, oh yeah, this is goofy, whatever, silly. You're really talking to the person, and I think it makes sense that it spun off from Bullseye in that way.
I think in the early days...
Jesse, that was the time where you're supposed to say, oh, I never thought about it like that.
You're brilliant.
I'm sorry, I'm just kidding.
I think in the early days, I
Sorry to cut you off.
Pushed for the show to have more conflict. And what we found over time, this is something, when I say we, I mean mostly John. What John found over time was that the special thing about the show was getting to know the people.
Yeah.
And the conflict was a medium to get to know the people. It was an in that we had to find the emotional lives of just regular folks around the country and eventually around the world.
Yeah. And
John's sincere interest in meeting people, in talking to, like, John is an actual extrovert, which is kind of amazing to me. But, we do live shows and he'll sit and talk to people after the show, signing autographs and doing whatever for hours. And it's not because he wants the ego gratification. I mean, he's not opposed to the ego gratification, but I don't think it's for that. Like, I don't think it's because he is a narcissist. It's because he sincerely enjoys talking to people and getting to know them, even if it's, 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And he wants to give each person 2 or 3 minutes so that he can feel like he made a connection with them and learn something about them. And that's what the show is. It's John's very sincere interest in learning about people, learning about their emotional lives, and to some extent trying to help them understand themselves. Yeah.
It genuinely does come like that. It's one of the best. It really does make those judge shows look bad. I'm like, why aren't they like this? This is actually really good.
I will say it's very fun for me to be on that show because as the sidekick, I can just do any dumb thing I want to. Like, I'm so used to being the host, even on Jordan Jesse Go, where my co-host Jordan is a wonderful host himself. I'm so used to being responsible for the clock and the tone and the rhythm and all those things. It's just so fun to let John be in charge of the show, and I just say something dumb when it comes into my head.
We are nearly at an hour, and I do not want to keep you any longer because I've taken way too much of your time now. This is bonkers. But Jesse, thank you so much for being on the show today. Absolutely, I've listened to your show for a good couple of years now. You've definitely inspired me an awful lot. I just want to say that to you, by your show and the way you do it and the way you conduct yourself and the way you, as you say, you didn't say this about yourself, but you've never done anything that was like, oh, let's have a guest on that's very, it's going to say something outrageous, something offensive, and it's going to be getting traction that way. It's always because the person is genuine and the person is genuinely doing something interesting, and that has come across, and I think it is influencing people ahead of you. Anyway, definitely.
I hope so.
Or the next generation, whatever.
I hope so.
It's influenced me anyway.
My goal is to build a generation of more boring radio hosts. More conflict avoidant, not news breaking radio hosts.
But then you counter that with Judge John Hodgeman, which is only conflict.
Yeah, there you go.
So there you go.
Nothing
which
but
apparently people don't like.
Nothing but the bitterest conflict.
There we go. Right. Jesse, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this. Jesse Thorn, head of MaximumFun.org, Bullseye on NPR, and Jordan Jesse Go and countless other podcasts. Were you going to sit there? Sorry.
Oh, I'm grateful for the invitation. I'm sorry that there was a pandemic. It canceled our plans to put together a tour of the UK and the Emerald Isle there. But I think that John and I will make it out there sometime soon, and you'll have to get on the. I mean, we're not going to do a Limerick show. That's the bad news.
Yeah,
we're not that famous. But you'll have to get on the train to Dublin or maybe Belfast.
Totally.
Definitely, yeah. And we'll see you
there.
I was assuming you can still cross the border.
Before you go. That's true, actually. But your mother is from Belfast, isn't she?
Yeah, my stepmother is from Belfast. Yeah, born and raised. Yeah. And she moved to France in her late teens and then to the United States after that. But yeah, I have aunts and uncles and cousins, and they all live, or they mostly live in Northern Ireland. Some of them live in Dublin. Some of my cousins live in Dublin, and it was like a very important part. My dad and my stepmother married when I was, I think, 7 or 8. So, a very important part of my childhood to get to spend time in Belfast. And my father did an organizing project in Dublin, so I spent some time there as a kid too. And very, very important part of my childhood, which is kind of funny as I think my own heritage is mostly English and German, but to have that very intimate connection with Ireland. My brothers qualify for Irish citizenship because their mother is Irish. And my stepmother didn't become an American citizen until after 9/11, when she got worried that if she did a crime, she would get deported. Still very ambivalent about America, quite reasonably, and got a lot going for us. But it's a very, how many dopey Americans like to talk about their connection to Ireland, right? Like it's the worst. But yeah, that is a very important part of my childhood and my identity is particularly that relationship to Belfast. And my wife and me and my then baby daughter got to go to Belfast about 8 years ago and see all my relatives, and then we made a trip to Donegal, which is, for my stepmother who grew up. I mean, my stepmother grew up a third of a block from the Falls Church Road in Belfast. I mean, like her corners, the Falls Church Road. I saw the house she grew up in, and when she was a kid, they'd go to Donegal to be indoctrinated, to learn Irish and do Irish stuff. Play penny whistles and whatever. And it's the most special place in the world to her. And to get to spend some time there with my family, my immediate family, and my stepmother's so important in my life was a really special thing.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for this. Is the second ending to this podcast second ending to this interview because we went on again. But this is the final one. I gotta let you go. You gotta go away. You gotta do stuff. Thank you so much for being on the show today. You're awesome. You're brilliant. Such a nice man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very grateful.
All right.
Should I transfer this to you?